So, I'm standing in my barn, holding a blowtorch and a calving lamp, while a sheriff's deputy reads an eviction notice out loud. Meanwhile, Susan from the HOA is recording me with her phone, yelling, "This is unauthorized construction on HOA land. Thing is, that's not her land, it's mine." And she's standing exactly 6 feet into a mistake her entire HOA board is about to regret permanently. Now, to be fair, I wasn't expecting to start my Tuesday with a blowtorch in one hand and the law in the other, but that's just the kind of week it's been. I came out to fix the heat lamp for our cow, Bessie. She's pushing her 3rd calf and likes to birth in the same corner of the barn every year, under the window my grandfather built. The lamp busted in last week's cold snap, and I was patching it together the same way Grandad taught me: fire, duct tape, and pure stubbornness. I didn't even see the cruiser pull up until the deputy stepped into the barn like it was a crime scene and unrolled the paper. Susan wasn't far behind, of course. She had that smug little grin she wears like a badge, only this one was extra smug, like she was about to win something. This property falls under HOA jurisdiction per updated zoning filings. You've violated Article 7, Section 12, regarding unapproved agricultural structures, she said, like she'd rehearsed it in the mirror, which, knowing Susan, she had. I didn't say a word. I just let the deputy talk. He looked uncomfortable, like the kind of guy who didn't sign up to evict a man from his family's barn while cows watched in judgment. I handed him a thermos of coffee out of habit, and the poor guy actually took it. Susan's jaw clenched at that. I calmly asked the deputy where this jurisdiction started. He pointed to a map printed on cheap legal paper that looked like it had been copied 20 times. I blinked at it. Then I laughed out loud, not a chuckle, a real belly laugh, because I recognized the map. It was my grandfather's old survey, the one that excluded the ranch from subdivision zoning explicitly. Susan had highlighted the wrong side of the creek. I told the deputy to hold on and jogged into the house. When I came back, I was holding a laminated copy of the original land deed, along with the county clerk's stamped boundary exemption, dated 1961. I handed it to him. Susan looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. That's when the real fun started. She started pacing in the barn doorway, still filming, rambling about community regulations, visual conformity, and my aggressive livestock presence. I asked her if she'd like to pet Bessie. She didn't get the joke. The deputy, bless him, started backing toward the door like he knew this was above his pay grade. Then Susan made the fatal mistake. She took one step inside the barn, just one, but enough to cross onto my title line. I didn't say a word. I just flicked the switch on the calving lamp. The blowtorch hissed alive. The camera shook in her hand. "You've got until Friday to vacate the premises," she snapped, pointing at me like I was some kind of criminal. I asked her if she had a warrant. She said, "I don't need one. I'm with the HOA." I looked at the deputy. His face said everything. No warrant, no standing, no jurisdiction. I thanked him for his time and turned back to my work. Susan stomped off in a fit, calling me a sovereign citizen nut job under her breath. I didn't follow her. I had bigger things to do, but I did plant the seed, while she was busy screaming at fences and spray painting driveways. I started digging through my family's records, not just the land deed. I mean everything, every survey, every transfer, every letter my great-grandfather ever signed during the town's founding years. I dusted off old files with red ribbons still sealing them. There were names in there, names I recognized from street signs. Turns out, my family didn't just live here, they helped build the place. By the time I was done, I had a pile of receipts thicker than Susan's HOA handbook, and something curious surfaced. A single-page letter, dated 1943, sealed by the town council and signed in ink that had faded to sepia. It granted temporary office space to the HOA's predecessor on the condition that the land be used in accordance with community cooperation and without prejudice toward any local family whose ancestor contributed land to the township. One stared at that phrase for a long time. Susan showed up again on Thursday with a measuring tape and 2 more board members. One of them was wearing golf shoes and a tie that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in a decade. She stood on my gravel path, yes, gravel, because apparently even that violated some visual aesthetic rule, and pointed at my barn, then at the house, then at me, non-conforming roofline, unregistered livestock quantity. No community integration, she said. I asked her if she'd like a muffin. I was baking at the time. She declined rudely. The moment they left, I made 3 calls, first to a lawyer I knew from vet benefits, second to the town zoning office, and third to my cousin, Tommy, because if this was going to get messy, I wanted him filming it. He's got a drone and a YouTube channel that specializes in local controversies. Let's just say, the footage he got of Susan accidentally moving HOA boundary markers onto my land went viral before sunset. By Friday, the board had sent an official letter threatening legal action unless I ceased all activities not approved by the HOA Architectural Committee. I framed it right next to my grandfather's shovel. I haven't responded yet. I'm letting them marinate. But here's the part they don't know. The land, their office sits on, the one they've been using to host barbecues, distribute fines, and hold their little cult meetings, that land used to belong to my great-grandfather. And the deed has a clause, a very specific one. I found it last night, tucked in the same folder as the letter from the town council. If they violate it, and oh boy, they already have, it triggers something very fun. I'm just waiting for the right moment to tell them. Because here's the twist. I'm not the one getting evicted. They are. The thing about small towns is they remember things not always accurately, but deeply. And sometimes, deeply enough that the truth sits in a box under someone's stairs, just waiting to be dusted off and weaponized. That night, after Susan's second attempt to serve me fake eviction papers, I made myself a mug of stovetop coffee, sat down in the old den my grandfather built out of reclaimed barnwood, and started sifting through everything he'd saved. The man wasn't sentimental, but he was a pack rat when it came to documents, war medals, livestock records, even newspaper clippings about zoning meetings from the 1960s. All there, and right in the middle, tucked inside a rusted tin marked "Township, do not toss," was what I'd been hoping for. It was a handwritten agreement, yellowed but crisp, bound in red tape that cracked when I unrolled it. It bore the town's original seal, back when it was a cluster of ranchers and grain traders trying to organize water rights, and scrolled at the bottom, in heavy ink, was my great-grandfather's name next to a clause that essentially said, if the land donated for township use is ever used to enforce rules that harm descendants of the donor, it reverts in ownership. It was wild, even wilder. The address on that document matched exactly with the HOA's current office. They were squatting on paper they didn't own. That building. They were renting it from thin air. I sat back in my creaky chair, stared at the fire, and let out a low whistle. Then I laughed, because all that smug condescension, all those fines, the phony notices, they weren't just morally wrong, they were legally invalid. They'd built their HOA empire on borrowed land and forgot to read the fine print carved into its foundation. I didn't go nuclear right away. That wouldn't have been any fun. No, I started slow, petty, tactical. I printed a blown-up copy of the clause and mounted it on my barn wall like a trophy. Then I bought a new mailbox, a massive cast iron, one shaped like a cow, bolted it to the fence, and stenciled the phrase, "Property not under HOA," in big black letters across the side. It drove Susan absolutely feral. She left a note stuffed into it the next day, claiming the mailbox itself was a visual eyesore and violation of Article 4. I mailed it back with a copy of the 1943 clause, attached, and added a sticky note that read, "Please refer to documents from people who actually own this land." By Monday, I noticed something new: a survey crew on the corner of my lot, pacing back and forth, trying not to make eye contact. When I walked over, they pretended to be measuring drainage elevation, but I saw the HOA logo on their clipboard. One guy nervously asked if I had a copy of my boundary lines. I handed him a laminated print of the original plat map. "This goes all the way back to 1912, I told him, grinning. "See that tree line? That's where my great-granddad cut the first irrigation trench. Everything past that, not yours." The poor guy just nodded and scribbled something. I offered him a sandwich. He declined. Susan probably warned them not to accept snacks from the barn psycho. Then came the HOA newsletter, an absolute masterpiece of passive aggression. There was a whole section titled "Dealing with Non-Compliant Neighbors," featuring a cartoon of a man in overalls refusing to mow his pasture. Susan was escalating publicly. She wanted the neighborhood to turn against me. But something funny happened instead. People started dropping by, not with pitchforks, but with pie. I had two old-timers show up with a tin of lemon bars and say, "We've been waiting years for someone to push back." Turns out, I wasn't the only one getting bullied with mysterious fines and arbitrary citations. One woman told me she was charged $200 for putting up solar lights in her garden. Another had a shed painted the wrong shade of beige. Everyone was tired of Susan. I told them to keep their heads down and just wait. Because while Susan was busy threatening me with more fake legal action, I was filing a quiet title claim with the county. My lawyer, bless his soul, got so excited he forgot to charge me for the first consult. He said the clause in the donation letter wasn't just enforceable, it was airtight. And the fact that the HOA had been operating on that land for decades without ever renewing the original grant. That was their Achilles heel. The moment they weaponized their bylaws against me, they breached the terms. And breach meant reversion. Reversion meant I'd own their building. And if I wanted, I could bulldoze it into a goat pen. Still, I wasn't aiming for destruction. Not yet. I wanted to see how far Susan would go, so I baited her. I repainted my barn doors bright blue, not neon or anything. Just a deep, solid blue. The next day, I got another final warning letter about improper color schemes. She hand-delivered it with her phone recording. She stood on my front steps in a tennis visor, filming me while announcing, "This property is in direct violation of the Visual Consistency Code." I asked her to point to the specific code. She fumbled. I offered to let her come inside and look it up. She declined again. She left, huffing, muttering about setting a precedent. And that's when I knew she was scared. She could feel it unraveling, the power, the fear, the smug certainty. It was cracking. She was trying to hang on to the illusion that she had control over this land, but it was all dust. And I was about to blow it into the wind. The county hearing was scheduled for the next month. Plenty of time for Susan to dig herself deeper. I hadn't told her yet. She still thought I was bluffing, still thought her newsletter army and clipboard patrol would scare me off. But she had no idea what she was standing on. No idea that her whole kingdom, her little HOA fortress, was built on land, given in good faith, by a man whose grandson had just found the legal grenade buried beneath it. And just as I was locking up the barn that evening, Tommy, my cousin with the drone, pulled into the driveway. He rolled down his window and said, "You're going to want to see this." I followed him back to his car, and he showed me the live feed, Susan at the town office, yelling at a clerk, waving papers, red-faced. Something had spooked her, something big. She must have found out or thought she did. I asked Tommy if he had audio. He zoomed in, tweaked a dial, and turned up the volume. Susan was saying, "I don't care what the deed says. That land belongs to the HOA. We've had it for 50 years. I'm not letting some barn hick steal it back." I smiled, leaned against the truck, and said, "She just admitted everything." Tommy grinned. The game was officially on. The courthouse smelled like old wood, burnt coffee, and someone's forgotten lunch, which felt oddly appropriate considering what we were about to serve Susan. I walked in wearing my best jeans, and the only blazer I own, the one my dad wore to my mum's funeral. Susan arrived a few minutes later, in a power suit 2 sizes too tight, and a smirk that said she still didn't believe this was real. Her entourage followed, clipboard guy, treasurer, and some lady who always looks like she's been smelling sour milk for 20 years. They all looked around like they expected this place to bend to them, like this was just a formality before they put me in my place. I didn't bother acknowledging them. I just took a seat next to my lawyer and opened my folder. Inside were copies of the deed, the 1943 clause, and a full-color photo of the HOA building, sitting squarely on the lot that belonged legally and historically to my family. The judge entered with a bored expression, probably expecting another noise complaint hearing or fence dispute. But the moment my lawyer opened with, "We are asserting rightful ownership of the property currently housing the HOA administrative building due to violation of a land use clause dating back 82 years. The judge perked up like he'd just heard someone drop a bomb in aisle 3. Susan tried to interrupt before we'd even finished the first sentence, waving her manicured hand and blurting out, "This is absurd. He's weaponizing a technicality from the past." The judge held up a hand like he was swatting a fly and said, "You'll get your turn, ma'am." That shut her up for all of 3 minutes. My lawyer walked them through the chain of ownership. He didn't just rely on the donation letter. We had town council minutes, signed witness statements, old newspaper clippings, and even a photo of my great-grandfather holding the ceremonial key at the building's dedication. Then we moved to the clause, the one stating that if the land were ever used to harm or penalize descendants of the donor, it would immediately revert back to the family. The clincher. Susan had signed and served multiple fines and complaints against me, citing alleged HOA violations. We had video evidence of her trespassing, verbal abuse, attempts to misrepresent land boundaries, and, of course, her greatest hits from the drone footage. It wasn't even a close call. The judge leaned back, removed his glasses, and said, "So, to summarize, the HOA not only violated the terms of the land agreement, they did so repeatedly and on record against someone who is a direct descendant of the original landowner." My lawyer nodded. The judge looked at Susan. "And your defense is what?" "Exactly." Susan stood up like she was about to give a TED talk. "The HOA has operated in good faith for over 50 years. We provide structure, safety, and aesthetic continuity to our residents. We've invested in community programs, improved property values, and, frankly, shouldn't be punished over one disgruntled neighbor who refuses to follow basic rules." The judge raised an eyebrow and asked, "Are you disputing the authenticity of the clause?" Susan stammered. "Well, no, but—" He cut her off. "Then it's not about one neighbor. It's about violating the conditions under which your organization was granted land use in the first place." She opened her mouth, closed it, and sat down. What followed was the most awkward silence I've ever witnessed. The HOA team looked like they were watching their house burn in slow motion. The judge turned to me and asked, "Do you intend to take possession of the building?" I said, "Yes." "And the land surrounding it?" I nodded again. "Do you intend to continue letting the HOA operate from that location?" I smiled. "That depends. Do I get to charge rent?" He chuckled. "That's up to you." Then he banged the gavel and said the words I'll never forget: "Possession reverts. Effective immediately. HOA is to vacate within 60 days, unless alternative arrangements are made with the new landowner." Susan exploded. She stood up, finger pointing, and launched into a full-blown tantrum about the misuse of antiquated documents, small-town corruption, and how this would ruin everything they'd built. The judge calmly said, "That's not my problem. You should have read the deed." She stormed out, heels clacking like gunshots down the hall. I stayed behind to file one last motion, an official request that any further HOA fines, notices, or communication directed at my address be considered harassment pending legal review. The clerk happily stamped it. By the time I walked out of the courthouse, word had already spread. Small town. Remember, I hadn't even gotten to my truck before a retired couple from down the road offered me fresh peaches as a thank you. One guy tried to slip me a bottle of moonshine, said he'd been fined $200 for having a wind chime. Another lady handed me a pie and whispered, "Don't let her run for anything again." She tried to tow my camper on Christmas Eve. I nodded politely, then drove home with the windows down and the kind of peace you only get after detonating a paper bomb in the middle of bureaucracy. That weekend, I started clearing out the old grain barn for a new project. Tommy helped me hang a sign on the gate, future site of the Heritage Center and Calving Museum. Now, accepting donations. Susan drove by twice that day, staring through her tinted windows like she'd just seen a ghost. I didn't wave. I didn't need to. She knew. She knew everything she thought was hers had been built on land she never controlled. And now, every HOA board meeting would be held in a building they didn't own, under the metaphorical roof of a man they tried to evict. And just when I thought it couldn't get any better, a letter arrived in the mail not from the HOA, but from their lawyer. Apparently, Susan had launched an internal challenge, blaming the rest of the board for the oversight. She claimed they failed to verify historical land records before taking action. The board, in response, was attempting to oust her to avoid being sued by other homeowners who were now exploring whether their fines could be retroactively invalidated due to unlawful operations. It was beautiful, a slow-motion implosion, and I wasn't even touching it. I was just sitting on my porch, watching the smoke curl up from the wreckage of their credibility. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because inside that letter was something curious. A brief mention that the HOA was contesting not the ownership, but the legal relevance of the donation clause. They weren't giving up. They were regrouping, planning something. Susan wasn't going down without dragging as many people as possible with her. And if I knew her at all, she wasn't going to let this end quietly. So I did what any responsible landowner would do. I picked up the phone, called the county records office, and requested a full audit of every parcel under HOA enforcement. Because if they wanted war, I was just getting warmed up. It took them 23 days to crack not the full 60. 23 days after the court ruling, I pulled into town to buy nails and feed, and there it was, an old U-Haul trailer backed into the HOA building's front lawn, with two confused teenagers loading box after box of paper files and cheap particle board furniture. Susan wasn't there. I figured either she'd finally resigned or was hiding behind a set of blinds, trying to manifest me into disappearing. Either way, it was happening. They were leaving, and no one was stopping them. The HOA building, once the epicenter of intimidation and clipboard tyranny, now looked like the end scene of a sitcom where the villain gets evicted with her cat and decorative succulents. I parked across the street, leaned against my truck, and watched with a coffee in hand as they carried out the faux marble reception desk that Susan had insisted on special ordering 2 years ago. They didn't say anything to me, just head down, keep moving energy. Maybe they thought I was going to gloat. Maybe they thought I'd start filming. But I didn't have to. Half the neighborhood had already posted photos online under the hashtag HOApocalypse. One woman even made t-shirts. Tommy set up a live feed on his channel with the caption, "The HOA gets hauled." Thousands of views rolled in. It was poetic. It was petty. It was perfect. Still, there was a strange quiet to it all. Like the part after a thunderstorm, where everything smells like wet leaves and bruised pride. People who'd once waved awkwardly at HOA patrol cars now leaned over their fences to say thank you. One guy, a widower named Jim, who'd been fined for having a wooden flamingo on his porch, offered to repaint my barn as a thank you. Another left a note in my mailbox that just said, "Freedom tastes like victory pie," along with an actual pie. For a while, it felt like the town was waking up from a bad dream, where everyone had been told the wrong rules by the wrong people for far too long. And now, they were blinking into the sun and realizing they'd had rights all along. But while the board was collapsing, Susan hadn't vanished entirely. Oh no, she was just recalibrating, whispering to the right people, trying to rebrand herself as the misunderstood protector of the community. At one point, she started showing up at unrelated city meetings, library funds, zoning permits, even the dog park renovation committee, offering volunteer help like some kind of bureaucratic ghost, haunting whatever space would still let her in. But the damage was done. Her name had become a punchline. Kids made jokes. Retirees muttered curses. The real estate agents in town quietly scrubbed her name from listings. Her power wasn't just gone, it was radioactive. No one wanted to touch it. And that's when I decided to make it permanent. The building they'd vacated was mine now, legally and historically. But I didn't want to rent it out, bulldoze it, or let it rot into some cautionary tale. I wanted to turn it into something better. So, I cleaned it up, fixed the plumbing, painted over the beige walls with warm earth tones. I took down all the framed bylaws and replaced them with old photos of the town when it was still a frontier village with cattle drives and Sunday picnics. Then I put up a sign, the Heritage House, Community Resource, and History Center, all welcome. People came slowly at first. Then in waves, they brought boxes of old family photos, newspaper clippings, faded maps. Veterans met for coffee in the mornings. Local teens used the back room for band practice. We even hosted a pie contest, judged by the oldest resident in town, a 97-year-old who said it was the first time he'd been in the building without getting a fine. There was laughter in the halls, now music got life. No one mentioned Susan. They didn't have to. And yet, she couldn't help herself. One afternoon, she pulled into the lot in her usual car and walked right in like nothing had happened. I was sweeping up after a group of third graders who'd done a chaotic art project involving glue and glitter. She looked around the room, eyes twitching at the lack of laminated signs and policy posters. I leaned on the broom and waited. Finally, she said, "You've turned this into some kind of joke." I said nothing. She gestured toward the community mural, a bright, messy collage that included a cartoon version of her with steam coming out of her ears. "This is slander," she snapped. I told her calmly that it wasn't slander if it was art. And besides, the kids had come up with it themselves. If she had a problem, maybe she should take it up with a fourth grader. She stood there for a moment, like she wanted to scream, then turned on her heel and walked out. That was the last time she ever stepped foot in the building. And, not long after, I heard she'd put her house up for sale quietly. No open house, no goodbye. The town kept moving. The HOA reformed under new leadership, Lena. Strictly voluntary, with no power to fine anyone. Just neighbors helping neighbors. Imagine that. Susan's old rules were repealed one by one. People painted their mailboxes rainbow colors just because they could. Someone even installed a plastic flamingo army on their lawn and named each one after a former board member and me. I went back to the barn. Bessie had her calf. Tommy filmed it. The video went viral apparently. People really love cows. Every now and then, I still get letters from nearby towns asking how we pulled it off, how we dismantled an out-of-control HOA without a single punch thrown. I always write the same thing back. Start with receipts, legal ones, emotional ones, and don't underestimate the power of a blowtorch, a family deed, and a cow named Bessie. One evening, while locking up the heritage house, I noticed something taped to the door, a small note, typed and signed. It said, "You didn't just win. You reminded us who this town belongs to. Thank you." I smiled, folded it into my pocket, and walked back home under the stars. The land was quiet, peaceful, mine. And now, right where the HOA sign used to hang, there's a new one, carved from local wood. It reads, "Private property. Trespassers will be offered coffee and a history lesson."